They doubted her. They mocked her. They said she was just a kid with impossible dreams. But no one expected the truth to come from where they least imagined: her own dog. What this animal revealed not only silenced the skeptics, but also exposed a corruption scheme that no one wanted to come to light. And what happened next was simply unbelievable. Watch until the end to see how this twist changed everything. And subscribe so you don't miss more mind-blowing stories like this. From an early age, Emily Mitchell knew she was different. While other children in Oak Ridge, Pennsylvania played carelessly on the playground, Emily preferred to dismantle electronic devices to understand their inner workings. At 12 years old, she could solve mathematical problems that even adults found challenging and questioned everything around her with a precision that was both remarkable and unsettling. Her intelligence wasn't celebrated in the small town where tradition and conformity were valued above all else. Instead, it made her a target. Teachers viewed her as presumptuous when she corrected their occasional mistakes. Classmates mockingly called her calculator brain and Miss Know-It-All, isolating her during lunch breaks and group activities. Even her parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, loving as they were, sometimes worried that their daughter's persistent questions and intellectual pursuits were just attention-seeking behaviors. "Emily, honey, wouldn't you rather join the cheerleading squad like Jessica Turner?" her mother would suggest, referring to their neighbor's daughter who represented everything Oak Ridge valued: popularity, conventional beauty, and uncomplicated ambition. But Emily didn't care about fitting in. She had created her own world, built on logic and reasoning, where patterns made sense and questions had answers. Her only true companion was Max, a scruffy mixed-breed dog she had rescued from the local shelter when she was 9. Unlike the humans in her life, Max seemed to understand her completely, offering unconditional acceptance with his soulful brown eyes and attentive ears that perked up whenever she explained her latest discovery or theory. "You get it, don't you, Max?" she would whisper, running her fingers through his golden fur as they sat together on her bedroom floor, surrounded by disassembled radios and stacks of advanced physics books. "You don't think I'm weird for wanting to understand how everything works?" On the surface, Oak Ridge was the perfect American small town, with its tree-lined streets, well-maintained Victorian houses, and friendly neighbors who waved to each other during morning commutes. The town square hosted farmers' markets on weekends, and the high school football games were community events that brought everyone together under Friday night lights. Mayor Richard Thompson frequently boasted about Oak Ridge being a slice of American perfection in his speeches at town halls. But beneath this picturesque facade, Emily began noticing inconsistencies. It started during a school assignment on local governance when she was researching public contracts for the new community center. The numbers didn't add up. The budget allocation seemed disproportionate to the actual construction costs, with vague line items that accounted for nearly 40% of the total funding. Curiosity piqued. Emily dug deeper. She noticed similar patterns in other public projects: the renovation of Oak Ridge Park, the new water treatment facility, and especially the expansion of the industrial zone at the edge of town, which had been approved with remarkable speed despite environmental concerns raised by some residents. "It just doesn't make sense, Max," she muttered one evening as she spread documents across her bedroom floor. "Why would the council approve a contract that's clearly overpriced from a company that didn't even exist 2 years ago?" When she tried sharing her findings with her history teacher, Mr. Peterson, he dismissed her with a condescending smile. "Emily, these matters are complicated. The adults handling them know what they're doing. Focus on your schoolwork instead of inventing conspiracies." Her classmates were even less receptive when she attempted to explain her suspicions during lunch. Jessica Turner flipped her perfect blonde hair and laughed. "There she goes again, thinking she's smarter than everyone. Nobody cares about boring contracts, Emily. That's why nobody wants to be friends with you." Even her father, a respected accountant in town, brushed off her concerns. "Honey, I appreciate your interest in municipal finance, but I'm sure there are explanations for what you're seeing. Mayor Thompson has done wonders for this town. Sometimes the paperwork doesn't tell the whole story." Undeterred, Emily continued her investigation, meticulously documenting patterns and connections between council decisions, contract allocations, and the small group of businesses that seemed to benefit consistently from these arrangements. She created a detailed spreadsheet tracking the relationships, noting how the same names appeared repeatedly in different configurations: Thompson Holdings, Westfield Enterprises, Richardson Development Group. It was during this period that Max's behavior began to change. The normally calm dog started growing restless during their evening walks, particularly when they passed certain locations like the mayor's office or the construction site of the new community center. One evening, as they walked past the parking lot behind Town Hall, Max growled at a man in an expensive suit who was getting into a black SUV. "It's okay, boy," Emily soothed, tugging gently on his leash, but Max remained tense until the vehicle pulled away. The next day, while working on her computer in her bedroom, Emily glanced out the window and noticed a similar black SUV parked across the street. It remained there for hours, and when she mentioned it to her parents at dinner, her father frowned. "Are you sure it's the same car, Emily? There are lots of black SUVs in town these days. The Richardson family bought a fleet of them for their business last month." Emily didn't push the issue, but she began paying closer attention to her surroundings. She noticed the car appearing repeatedly, always at a distance, always just visible enough to be recognized. Sometimes there were different vehicles, but the pattern was unmistakable. Someone was watching their house. Max sensed it too. The dog became increasingly protective, sleeping at the foot of her bed rather than in his usual spot in the corner, and barking at seemingly random moments when they were alone in the house. His behavior both comforted and concerned Emily. "What do you know that I don't, Max?" she whispered one night as the dog stood alert at her bedroom window, staring intently at the darkened street below. The answer came unexpectedly the following weekend. During their Saturday morning walk in Oak Ridge Park, Max suddenly pulled free from Emily's grip, something he had never done before. He darted across the grass toward a secluded area near the maintenance shed, barking urgently. "Max, come back!" Emily called, chasing after him. When she caught up, the dog was digging frantically near a trash can, partially concealed by overgrown bushes. Emily knelt beside him, puzzled by his behavior, until she spotted something glinting in the freshly disturbed soil. Reaching down, she carefully extracted a small electronic device covered in dirt. It looked like a high-end voice recorder, the kind journalists used for interviews, sleek, expensive, and definitely not something that would be casually tossed away. Emily glanced around nervously, suddenly feeling exposed in the otherwise empty park. With trembling hands, she slipped the device into her jacket pocket and urged Max to follow her home. In the safety of her bedroom, door locked and curtains drawn, Emily examined her find. The recorder was password protected, but that didn't deter her. After connecting it to her computer and running a specialized program she had developed for her robotics club, she managed to bypass the security measures. What she heard made her blood run cold. The recording wasn't crystal clear, but distinct enough to recognize voices discussing arrangements, payments, and keeping certain parties quiet. Emily's heart raced as she recognized Mayor Thompson's distinctive baritone, along with the voices of Councilmember Richardson and William Westfield, the town's wealthiest businessmen. They were discussing something called Project Oak Ridge Revival and the necessary adjustments to ensure its continuation. "We need to make sure no one connects these dots," Mayor Thompson said at one point. "The federal inspectors will be arriving next month and everything needs to appear perfectly legitimate by then. What about the environmental reports? Asked a voice Emily didn't recognize. Someone could start asking questions about the water supply. Those reports have been handled, came Richardson's smooth reply. Trust me, no one in this town is going to rock the boat. They're all too comfortable with their rising property values and new community facilities. Emily sat frozen, her mind racing to process what she had just heard. This wasn't just about inflated contracts or questionable business relationships. This was something far bigger, something that potentially affected everyone in Oak Ridge, including her family and friends. A sudden bark from Max startled her from her thoughts. The dog was standing alert at her bedroom window again, ears perked forward. Moving cautiously, Emily peered through a gap in the curtains. The black SUV was back, parked directly across from their house. This time, there was no mistaking its purpose or coincidence. They're looking for this, aren't they? She whispered to Max, clutching the recorder tightly. But how did it end up buried in the park? And who lost it? Emily knew she needed more evidence before she could take action. The recording was damning but incomplete, offering tantalizing hints of a larger scheme without providing concrete details. If she came forward with just this, she would be dismissed as the imaginative, attention-seeking girl everyone already thought she was. Max nuzzled her hand, as if sensing her distress and offering reassurance. Emily stroked his head, drawing comfort from his steadfast presence. You're right, boy. We're not giving up, she said with newfound determination. If they're watching us, that means we're onto something important. And if it's important enough for them to worry about, it's important enough for us to keep investigating. What Emily couldn't possibly know was how her discovery would soon set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just her life, but the entire fabric of Oak Ridge itself. The peaceful town was sitting on secrets far darker than she had imagined, and powerful forces would stop at nothing to keep those secrets buried. But they hadn't counted on the persistence of one brilliant young girl and her remarkably intuitive dog. As darkness fell over Oak Ridge that evening, Emily carefully hid the recorder inside a hollowed-out physics textbook on her shelf, then sat at her desk to formulate a plan. She would need to be methodical, cautious, and above all, smarter than those who sought to intimidate her. With Max vigilantly standing guard at her side, Emily began mapping out the connections she had uncovered, unaware that across town, an emergency meeting was being convened to address a very specific problem: the missing recorder and the curious, a girl who might have found it. We have a situation, Mayor Richard Thompson announced, his normally confident voice tight with tension as he addressed the small group gathered in William Westfield's home office. The luxurious room, with its mahogany bookshelves and leather furniture, sat on the top floor of the largest mansion in Oak Ridge, overlooking the town like a silent sentinel. The recorder is missing. Jenkins was supposed to secure it after our last meeting, but apparently he got careless. The mayor paced before the ornate fireplace, his reflection dancing in the polished marble floor. And there's reason to believe it might have been found. William Westfield, a tall, imposing man, with silver hair and cold blue eyes, remained seated behind his massive desk. By whom? He asked simply, his tone making it clear that he expected a name, not excuses. The Mitchell girl, Council Member James Richardson replied, loosening his tie nervously. Emily Mitchell. She and that dog of hers were seen in the park today, near where Jenkins thinks he might have dropped it. The dog was digging, and she took something before leaving in a hurry. That troublesome little genius? Westfield's eyebrow arched. The one who's been poking around in public records? Unfortunately, yes, Mayor Thompson confirmed, we've been keeping an eye on her since she started asking questions about the community center contracts. We didn't think much of it initially. Who would take a 12-year-old seriously? But she's persistent. And worse, she's smart. Too smart. Then, We need to retrieve what's ours, Westfield said decisively, before she figures out how to access it, or God forbid, shares it with someone who might actually listen to her. We've already sent someone to keep watch on her house, Richardson assured him. But we need to be careful. Her father is well respected in the community, and any obvious interference could raise unwanted attention. Westfield's thin lips curved into what could almost be mistaken for a smile. Then we'll need to be creative, won't we? After all, who would believe the imaginative theories of a socially awkward child known for exaggeration and attention-seeking behavior? By the time we're done, even her parents will doubt her. Meanwhile, across town, Emily was putting the final touches on her investigation board. Her bedroom wall, once covered with posters of famous scientists and mathematicians, now displayed a complex web of connections, photos, and sticky notes detailing everything she had discovered. Red string linked key players to questionable projects, while yellow notes highlighted suspicious financial transactions. "What do you think, Max?" she asked, stepping back to survey her work. The dog tilted his head, as if genuinely considering the evidence before him. "Yeah, it's still missing something. We need to figure out what Project Oak Ridge Revival really is, and what they meant about the water supply." Emily had spent hours researching environmental regulations and water safety standards, learning about contaminants and the potential consequences of compromised water systems. The implications were disturbing. If Westfield Enterprises and the town council were covering up environmental violations, potentially thousands of people could be affected. "We need more evidence," she muttered, absently scratching behind Max's ears. "Something concrete that can't be dismissed as the imagination of a weird kid." The following morning, Emily woke to find her parents unusually quiet at breakfast. Her father kept glancing at her over his newspaper, while her mother seemed to be avoiding eye contact altogether. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked, pouring herself a glass of orange juice. Her parents exchanged a look before her father cleared his throat. "Principal Davis called last night. He says you've been accessing school computers to research private information about town officials and local businesses." He seemed concerned. Emily's hand froze mid-air. "I was doing research for a civics project. There's nothing private about public contracts and council meeting minutes." "Honey," her mother interjected gently, "he mentioned that you've been talking to other students about some kind of conspiracy involving Mayor Thompson and the Westfield family. He thought we should know that you might be developing some unhealthy fixations." "It's not a fixation," Emily protested, feeling a familiar frustration building inside her. "I found irregularities in public documents. Anyone who looked would see the same things." Her father sighed, setting down his newspaper. "Emily, we know you have an active imagination and exceptional analytical skills, but sometimes patterns are just coincidences, not conspiracies. We're worried that you're isolating yourself even more with these theories." "They're not theories, Dad," Emily insisted, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "There's something wrong in this town and nobody's willing to look at it because they're all too comfortable with their perfect little lives." "That's enough," her father said firmly. "We're not having this discussion now. You'll be late for school." The ride to Oak Ridge Middle School was silent and tense. When they arrived, Emily's father turned to her with an expression that mingled concern with disappointment. "Just try to focus on your schoolwork today, okay? No more conspiracy theories." Emily nodded mechanically, knowing that argument was futile. As she walked toward the school entrance, she could feel eyes on her, more than the usual curious or judgmental glances from her peers. Teachers watched her pass, with expressions ranging from concern to suspicion. In her first period class, she found "crazy" written on her desk in black marker. By lunchtime, the whispers had grown loud enough to reach her even in her usual isolated corner of the cafeteria. Jessica Turner and her friends made a point of walking past Emily's table, talking just loudly enough to be overheard. My dad says her parents are thinking of sending her to a special school for troubled kids, Jessica stage whispered. Apparently, she's been making up all these wild stories about important people in town. My dad says it's a cry for attention because she has no friends. Emily kept her eyes fixed on her untouched sandwich, burning with humiliation and anger. How had things escalated so quickly? Who had been talking to Principal Davis about her research? More importantly, how had they known about it at all? The answer came later that afternoon, when she returned home and found her bedroom door slightly ajar. Emily always closed it completely before leaving for school. It was one of her many routines. Heart-pounding, she pushed the door open to find Max whining anxiously in the center of the room. One glance told her what had happened. Her investigation board had been disturbed, with several key photos and notes clearly missing. Her laptop was open on her desk, though she distinctly remembered closing it. Most alarmingly, the hollowed-out physics book where she had hidden the recorder was on the floor, empty. "They were here," she whispered to Max, who pressed against her leg, as if confirming her suspicion. "They took the recorder." Emily sank onto her bed, mind racing. The invasion of her private space was shocking enough, but the implications were even more disturbing. Someone had entered her home, searched her room, and stolen evidence while she was at school. Worse, they had somehow known exactly what to look for. "Mom? Dad?" she called out, but the house remained silent. Her parents wouldn't be home for at least another hour. Moving quickly, Emily checked the rest of her room. Her backup hard drive, hidden inside a stuffed animal on her shelf, appeared untouched. At least she still had copies of the public documents. She'd collected, though, the most damning evidence, the recorder, was gone. "We need to be smarter, Max," she told the dog, who watched her with concerned eyes. "They think they've stopped us, but they've just confirmed everything. No one goes to this much trouble unless they're hiding something serious." That evening, Emily pretended everything was normal during dinner, laughing at her father's jokes and discussing an upcoming science project with forced enthusiasm. If her parents noticed her unusual cheerfulness, they didn't comment, seemingly relieved that she wasn't bringing up conspiracies or questioning the town leadership. After excusing herself to finish homework, Emily returned to her room and enacted the first phase of her new plan. She knew now that her computer was likely compromised, so she wrote a deliberately misleading journal entry about giving up her investigation, expressing remorse for letting my imagination run wild and deciding to focus on fitting in better at school. The real work would happen elsewhere, on a second-hand laptop she had rebuilt and modified, which remained hidden in a waterproof container buried at the back of the garden shed. Max would be her lookout and her guide, his keen senses alerting her to dangers she might miss. Over the next few days, Emily maintained the facade of a chastened, compliant daughter while secretly intensifying her investigation. Max became her silent partner, seemingly understanding the need for discretion. During their walks, he would lead her to places she might never have thought to explore. Behind the abandoned mill at the edge of town, near the fenced-off construction site of the new water treatment facility, and most frequently, to the loading docks behind Westfield Enterprises' main office. It was at the loading docks that they made their next significant discovery. Max's behavior grew increasingly agitated one evening as they passed by, pulling so insistently on his leash that Emily finally relented and followed him into the shadows behind the building. There, partially concealed beneath a dumpster, they found a stack of papers that had apparently been improperly discarded rather than shredded. Most were meaningless, shipping manifests and routine correspondence. But one caught Emily's attention immediately. It was a chemical analysis report from an independent laboratory, addressed to Westfield Enterprises, with several compounds highlighted in alarming red. Across the top, someone had scrawled, "Suppress, replace with alternate report." Emily's Hands trembled as she carefully folded the document and tucked it into her jacket. This was exactly the kind of evidence she needed, something that couldn't be dismissed as a child's imagination. The report was dated just 3 weeks earlier and bore official letterhead and signatures. "Good boy," she whispered to Max, who seemed to understand the importance of their find. "Let's get out of here before someone sees us." As they turned to leave, the sudden beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness. "Hey! Who's there?" a gruff voice called out. Emily's heart leaped to her throat. She crouched low, pulling Max close to her side as heavy footsteps approached their hiding place. The security guard moved methodically, his light sweeping across the area where they concealed themselves behind a stack of empty pallets. "I know someone's back here," the man called out. "Show yourself now, or I'm calling the police." Emily held her breath, feeling Max tense beside her. The guard took another step forward, and his flashlight beam came within inches of illuminating them. They were trapped, with no clear escape route that wouldn't immediately reveal their presence. Then, unexpectedly, a loud crash came from the opposite side of the loading dock. The guard swung around, his attention diverted by the sudden noise. "Who's there?" he shouted, moving away from Emily and Max to investigate the disturbance. For a moment, Emily remained frozen in place, confused by their sudden reprieve. It was only when she caught a glimpse of a small, furry figure darting between shadows that she understood. A raccoon had knocked over a stack of empty containers, providing the perfect distraction. "Now," Emily whispered to Max, and together they slipped silently away from the loading dock, keeping to the shadows until they were safely out of sight. Once they reached the tree line that bordered the property, Emily allowed herself a moment to breathe, her heart still racing from their narrow escape. "That was too close," she told Max, who seemed oddly calm despite the danger they had just avoided. "But it was worth it. This report could be exactly what we need." What Emily didn't realize as they made their way home was that they had not gone entirely unnoticed. From the darkened window of his second-floor office, William Westfield watched the girl and her dog disappear into the distance, his cold eyes narrowing in calculation. Beside him, Mayor Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we've underestimated her," Westfield said quietly. "It seems our young Miss Mitchell is more resourceful than we anticipated. I think it's time we took more decisive action." "What are you suggesting?" Thompson asked, his voice betraying his nervousness. Westfield turned from the window with a chilling smile. "Nothing drastic, Richard. After all, she's just a child. But every child has vulnerabilities, and it's high time we identified Emily Mitchell's weak spot." As the two men continued their conversation, formulating plans to neutralize the threat posed by one determined 12-year-old girl, Emily was carefully examining her latest find under the dim light of her flashlight, hidden beneath blankets in her bedroom. The chemical report contained evidence of contaminants in soil samples, taken from areas surrounding the new industrial development, contaminants that could potentially leach into the town's groundwater supply, if not properly contained. Project Oak Ridge Revival was beginning to make terrible sense. It wasn't about revitalizing the town at all. It was about covering up environmental hazards that should have prevented the industrial development from ever being approved. And the people behind it were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to keep their secret, including intimidating a young girl and invading her home. "They think they can scare us away," Emily whispered to Max, who lay protectively at her side. "But they don't understand what they're up against. We're just getting started." The next morning at Oak Ridge Middle School, Emily noticed a subtle but unmistakable shift in how people treated her. Teachers who had previously regarded her with mild exasperation now watched her with open concern, whispering to each other when they thought she wasn't looking. Her classmates, typically content to simply ignore her, now actively avoided her, creating a visible bubble of isolation around her desk. During science class, her favorite subject, Emily raised her hand to answer a question about chemical compounds, a topic now particularly relevant to her investigation. Mr. Bennet, who had always appreciated her academic enthusiasm, hesitated before reluctantly acknowledging her. "Yes, Emily," he said, his tone cautious, as if bracing for something problematic. "The reaction between those elements would create a compound similar to what's found in industrial waste from manufacturing processes," she answered, deliberately, keeping her response academic and avoiding any connection to her discoveries. Mr. Bennet nodded tersely. "That's correct, thank you." He quickly moved on, calling on Jessica Turner for the next question, though her hand hadn't been raised. At lunch, Emily sat alone as usual, but today the isolation felt orchestrated rather than incidental. As she picked at her sandwich, she overheard fragments of conversations from nearby tables. "My mom says her parents are really worried. Might need professional help. Making up crazy stories about Mayor Thompson." Emily kept her eyes down, fighting the hot sting of tears that threatened to spill over. She had expected resistance to her investigation, but not this coordinated campaign to discredit her. Someone was systematically destroying her already limited credibility, ensuring that even if she did come forward with evidence, no one would believe her. The final blow came during last period, when Principal Davis appeared at the classroom door, gesturing for her teacher to step outside. Through the narrow window in the door, Emily could see them conversing seriously, with occasional glances in her direction. When Mrs. Harper returned, her smile was strained. "Emily, Principal Davis would like to see you in his office. Please take your things." The walk down the empty corridor felt like a march to the gallows. Principal Davis was waiting in his office with school counselor Mrs. Reynolds beside him. The presence of the counselor confirmed Emily's suspicions about the nature of this meeting. "Emily, please have a seat," Principal Davis said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "We wanted to check in with you. Your teachers have expressed some concerns about your recent behavior and some of the ideas you've been sharing with other students." Emily sat rigidly, hands clasped in her lap. "What ideas specifically, Principal Davis?" He exchanged a glance with Mrs. Reynolds before continuing. "Well, there's been talk that you believe certain town officials and business leaders are involved in some kind of conspiracy, that you've been collecting evidence and trying to convince others that something illegal is happening in Oak Ridge." "Oh, I've been researching public information for a civics project," Emily replied carefully. "If that research has revealed inconsistencies in public records, isn't that worth discussing?" Mrs. Reynolds leaned forward with a practiced, sympathetic expression. "Emily, sometimes when bright young people like yourself feel isolated or misunderstood, they create complex narratives to explain those feelings. It's a perfectly normal coping mechanism, but it can become problematic when those narratives begin to involve real people in harmful ways." Emily felt a surge of indignation. "Are you suggesting I'm making this up because I don't have friends?" "Of course not," Principal Davis interjected smoothly. "We're simply concerned about your well-being. Your parents mentioned you've been having trouble sleeping, that you believe someone broke into your house to take things from your room." The betrayal stung sharply. Emily had confided in her parents about the missing recorder, but had carefully avoided mentioning her continued investigation. They had seemed sympathetic, if skeptical. Now she realized they had reported her concerns to the school, framing them as paranoid delusions rather than legitimate fears. "We've arranged for you to meet with Mrs. Reynolds 3 times a week during study hall," Principal Davis continued. "Your parents have agreed this would be beneficial. And if I refuse," Emily challenged, though she already knew the answer. "This isn't optional, Emily," he replied, his tone hardening slightly. "Consider it part of your educational program for the remainder of the semester." By the time Emily arrived home that afternoon, her determination had crystallized into something harder and more focused than before. They were using every institutional advantage, parental authority, educational hierarchy, social pressure, to silence her, which meant she was onto something significant. Max greeted her at the door with his usual enthusiasm, his presence a balm to her wounded spirit. As she knelt to embrace him, she noticed something unusual, a small paper tag attached to his collar that hadn't been there that morning. Carefully removing it, she found a phone number scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting, accompanied by 3 words, "You were right." Emily stared at the note, her mind racing. Someone had approached Max while he was in the yard during the day. Someone who knew about her investigation and apparently wanted to help. But could she trust this mysterious ally? Or was it another trap? After dinner, Emily told her parents she was taking Max for his evening walk. Once safely away from the house, she used the prepaid phone she had purchased with saved allowance money, a precaution she had taken after discovering her room had been searched. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number from the note. It rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, speaking in a hushed tone. "Is this Emily Mitchell?" "Who are you?" Emily countered, unwilling to confirm her identity to a stranger. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. My husband worked security for Westfield Enterprises until last month." The woman paused, her voice tightening. "He's the one who lost the recorder you found." Emily's breath caught. "How do I know this isn't a trick?" "You don't," Sarah admitted. "But I'm taking a bigger risk than you are. My husband was responsible for documenting those meetings for William Westfield's private records. When the recorder went missing, they accused him of carelessness at best, deliberate sabotage at worst. He was fired, blacklisted, and now none of the businesses in town will hire him. We have 3 kids, a mortgage, and savings that won't last another month." "What do you want from me?" Emily asked cautiously. "We need to talk in person. There are things you need to know about Project Oak Ridge Revival, things that weren't on that recorder. If you're really trying to expose what's happening, I can help. My husband kept backups." They arranged to meet the following evening at the old playground behind the elementary school, a location sufficiently public to be safe, yet private. Enough for a discreet conversation. Emily hung up, feeling both hopeful and apprehensive. This could be the breakthrough she needed, or an elaborate setup to discredit her further. That night, as Emily prepared for bed, her mother knocked gently. On her door, Linda Mitchell entered with a mug of hot chocolate and an apologetic smile. "Peace offering," she said, setting the mug on Emily's nightstand. "I know you're upset about the counseling sessions." Emily shrugged, unwilling to make this easier than it needed to be. Her mother sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Honey, we're worried about you. This fixation on conspiracies, believing someone broke into our house, it's not healthy." "You don't believe me," Emily stated flatly, "about any of it." Linda hesitated. "We believe that you believe it. There's a difference." "So you think I'm crazy?" "Of course not. You're brilliant, Emily. Your father and I have always known that. But sometimes brilliant minds can make connections that aren't really there, see patterns in coincidences." Emily studied her mother's face, noting the genuine concern in her eyes. Linda Mitchell wasn't part of any conspiracy. She was simply a parent worried about her child, manipulated by the very people Emily was investigating. "Mom," Emily said carefully, "what if I could prove that something really is happening? Would you listen then? Really listen?" Her mother stroked her hair gently. "Of course we would. Your father and I will always listen to you. But honey, this stress isn't good for you. Try the counseling sessions. Talk to Mrs. Reynolds. Maybe it will help clarify your thoughts." After her mother left, Emily lay awake planning her next moves. She would play along with the counseling sessions, projecting the image of a contrite student recognizing the error of her ways. Meanwhile, she would meet with Sarah Jenkins and evaluate this potential new evidence. If it was substantial enough, Perhaps she could finally convince her parents to take her seriously. The following day unfolded according to the new normal. Emily attended her classes, endured the whispers and sidelong glances, and met with Mrs. Reynolds for her first counseling session. The counselor was professional and kind, focusing on general questions about Emily's interests and goals, rather than immediately addressing the conspiracy theories. It was a smart approach, Emily recognized, building rapport before attempting intervention, but she wasn't fooled. By evening, Emily's nerves were stretched taut as she prepared to meet Sarah Jenkins. She told her parents she was taking Max for an extended walk to clear her head after a difficult day, playing to their expectations of a troubled child seeking solace. The old playground was deserted when they arrived, the aging equipment casting long shadows in the setting sun. Emily positioned herself on a bench with good visibility in all directions, Max alert beside her. At precisely 7 o'clock, a woman in her mid-30s approached from the direction of the parking lot. Sarah Jenkins looked nothing like Emily had imagined. With her sensible bob haircut, khaki pants, and navy cardigan, she resembled a kindergarten teacher more than the wife of a security guard involved in corporate espionage. Only the dark circles under her eyes and the nervous way she scanned their surroundings betrayed her anxiety. "Emily?" she asked quietly, stopping a few feet away. Max, usually wary of strangers, sniffed the air and wagged his tail, a good sign in Emily's experience. She nodded, gesturing for Sarah to join her on the bench. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Sarah said, keeping her voice low despite the empty playground. "It's a lot to ask anyone to trust a stranger, especially after what you've been through." "I'm still not sure I should trust you," Emily replied honestly, "but Max seems to think you're okay, and he's a pretty good judge of character." Sarah smiled briefly at the dog before her expression turned serious again. "My husband Michael worked for Westfield for 8 years. He was trusted. That's why they assigned him to security for the Project Oak Ridge revival meetings. His job was to record the discussions for Westfield's private archives and prevent any unauthorized listening devices." "But he kept copies," Emily guessed. Sarah nodded. "Insurance." Michael had concerns about some of the things he was hearing, especially after the environmental report started coming in last year. When the recorder went missing and they accused him of negligence, William Westfield made it clear that Michael was being watched. We couldn't risk coming forward then. What changed? Sarah reached into her purse and withdrew a small USB drive. "This contains copies of all the recordings, plus documents Michael photographed during meetings. We've been too afraid to use it, but then we started hearing rumors about you. A young girl asking questions, collecting evidence. When they began their campaign to discredit you, Michael realized you must have found something significant." Emily eyed the USB drive cautiously. "Why give this to me? Why not take it to the authorities yourselves?" "Udi, because Westfield owns half the police department and has the ear of every politician in the county," Sarah replied bitterly. "And because no one is watching you as closely as they're watching us. You're just a kid. They've been working to discredit you, but they don't see you as a real threat. Not like they would an adult with these recordings." Emily took the drive, turning it over in her palm. "What exactly is Project Oak Ridge Revival?" "On the surface, it's a development initiative. New industrial zone, expanded commercial district, infrastructure upgrades. The reality is that Westfield acquired land on the cheap by concealing environmental test results that showed dangerous levels of chemical contamination from the old factory that used to operate there. They've been falsifying reports, bribing officials, and cutting corners on containment measures that would eat into their profit margins." "The water supply," Emily murmured, remembering the conversation she'd heard on the recorder. Sarah nodded grimly. "The containment failures could eventually leach chemicals into the groundwater, affecting the entire town. But by then, Westfield and his cronies will have made their fortunes and moved on, leaving Oak Ridge with a public health disaster and cleanup costs that would bankrupt the municipality. Why would Mayor Thompson go along with this? He lives here too. There's a recording on that drive of Westfield promising Thompson a lucrative position at his corporate headquarters in Philadelphia once his term ends. Thompson's wife has already purchased property there. They never intended to stay and face the consequences. Emily clutched the USB drive tightly. This is exactly what I needed. Thank you. Sarah stood, glancing nervously at her watch. I should go. Michael doesn't know I'm here. I told him I was at my sister's. The less he knows, the safer he is if this comes back on us. She hesitated, then added, Be careful, Emily. These people have destroyed lives for much less than what you're trying to do. As Sarah walked away, Emily felt a weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The USB drive in her hand wasn't just evidence, it was the Jenkins family's future, their safety, their reputation. If she failed to use it effectively, they would have risked everything for nothing. Come on, Max, she whispered to the dog. We've got work to do. Back at home, Emily copied the files to her hidden laptop, then resealed the USB drive in a waterproof container and buried it beneath the large rock in their backyard garden, a location only she and Max knew about. The initial review of the files confirmed everything Sarah had told her and more. Project Oak Ridge Revival wasn't just about environmental corners. It involved kickbacks, falsified safety inspections, and deliberate manipulation of property values to force certain residents to sell. Over the next few days, Emily maintained her facade of compliance, attending counseling sessions with Mrs. Reynolds and keeping her head down at school. But internally, she was formulating a plan. She needed to present the evidence in a way that couldn't be dismissed or buried, a public forum where denial would be impossible. The annual Oak Ridge Town Hall meeting was scheduled for the following week. Mayor Thompson always used these events as photo opportunities, inviting press from neighboring communities to showcase Oak Ridge's remarkable progress. It would be the perfect venue for Emily's revelation if she could find a way to access it without being immediately shut down. Emily's opportunity came unexpectedly during her third counseling session with Mrs. Reynolds. The counselor, encouraged by Emily's apparent cooperation in previous sessions, suggested a practical exercise. I think it might be helpful for you to channel your analytical skills into a structured project, Mrs. Reynolds proposed. The annual town hall is coming up, and Principal Davis mentioned you've shown interest in local governance. What if you attended as a student representative? You could prepare a presentation on what you've learned about civic participation. It was all Emily could do to maintain her neutral expression. That sounds interesting. Would I be allowed to ask questions during the meeting? Within reason, of course. It would be good for you to engage constructively with local officials instead of viewing them with suspicion. Mrs. Reynolds smiled encouragingly. I'll speak with Principal Davis about adding you to the program. That evening, as Emily and Max took their usual walk, her mind raced with possibilities. The town hall invitation was the perfect Trojan horse, a school-sanctioned opportunity to present her evidence in a public forum with media present. But she would need to be careful. If she revealed her intentions too soon, her invitation would be revoked immediately. As they rounded the corner near Westfield Enterprises headquarters, Max suddenly froze, his hackles rising. Emily followed, his gaze to a black SUV parked across the street, its engine running. Easy, boy, she murmured, tugging gently on his leash. Let's go another way. They turned down a side street, but Emily could hear the SUV's engine revving behind them. It was following slowly, maintaining a deliberate distance. Her heart pounded as she quickened her pace, guiding Max toward a nearby grocery store. The SUV remained behind them, matching their speed. Just as fear began to overwhelm her, Max suddenly lunged forward with unexpected strength, nearly pulling the leash from Emily's grasp. He barked sharply, racing toward an approaching police cruiser that had turned onto the street. The patrol car slowed as the officer inside noticed the commotion. The black SUV immediately accelerated, turning at the next intersection and disappearing from view. By the time the police officer stepped from his vehicle, Emily and Max were alone on the sidewalk. "Everything okay here?" the officer asked, eyeing the agitated dog warily. "Yes, sir," Emily replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "My dog just got excited seeing your car. He loves police officers." The officer seemed skeptical, but not suspicious. "Make sure you keep him under control, and you shouldn't be out alone this close to dark." "We're heading home now," Emily assured him, tugging Max back to her side. As they walked away, Emily knelt beside her dog, burying her face in his fur. "You knew exactly what to do, didn't you?" she whispered. Max licked her cheek, his intelligent eyes seeming to confirm her suspicion. He had deliberately created a diversion, using the police officer's presence to scare off their pursuer. The incident convinced Emily that her time was running out. The surveillance was becoming more brazen, less concerned with maintaining pretense. She needed to act before Westfield and his associates decided she was too much of a liability, regardless of her age. With renewed urgency, Emily spent the next few days preparing her presentation for the town hall. On the surface, it was exactly what Mrs. Reynolds had suggested: an educational overview of civic participation and local governance. But embedded within the innocuous slides were carefully selected excerpts from the Jenkins files, presented in a sequence that would build an undeniable case against Project Oak Ridge Revival and its architects. The night before the town hall, Emily sat on her bed with Max curled beside her, reviewing her strategy one final time. She had made copies of the most damning documents and placed them in sealed envelopes addressed to 3 different recipients: the State Environmental Protection Agency, the Regional FBI Office, and a respected investigative journalist from Philadelphia, whose contact information she had found online. The envelopes were hidden in her backpack, ready to be mailed immediately after the town hall, regardless of the outcome. "Tomorrow changes everything," she told Max, scratching behind his ears. "No matter what happens, we've done everything we could." What Emily couldn't know was that across town, in William Westfield's imposing mansion, another meeting was taking place, one that would dramatically alter her carefully laid plans. "She's been added to the town hall program," Mayor Thompson reported nervously. "Some misguided attempt at therapeutic civic engagement suggested by the school counselor." "And you approved this?" Westfield's voice was dangerously quiet. "It seemed harmless. She's supposed to give a brief presentation on student civic involvement." 5 minutes, closely supervised. What damage could she possibly do? Westfield's cold laugh held no humor. "You still underestimate her. This girl has consistently outmaneuvered us at every turn. She's found evidence we thought was destroyed, made connections we believed were buried, and now she's manipulated her way into a public forum with press present. What should we do? Cancel her presentation?" "No," Westfield replied after a moment's consideration. "That would only raise questions. We'll let her have her moment, but we'll ensure it's her last. It's time to neutralize the Emily Mitchell problem once and for all." As the 2 men continued plotting, neither was aware of the critical miscalculation they were making. They had studied Emily's patterns, analyzed her weaknesses, and developed what they believed was a foolproof plan to discredit and silence her. But they had overlooked the most important factor in the equation: a remarkably intuitive dog named Max, whose unexpected actions the following day would change everything. The Oak Ridge Community Center hummed with activity as residents filed in for the annual town hall meeting. Local business owners chatted in small groups, while families settled into rows of folding chairs. At the front of the room, Mayor Thompson conversed quietly with William Westfield and other town officials, occasionally glancing toward the entrance with barely concealed anxiety. Emily arrived with her parents, Max walking obediently at her side. She had insisted on bringing the dog, claiming his presence helped with her anxiety, a suggestion reinforced by Mrs. Reynolds, who viewed it as a positive coping mechanism. Principal Davis had reluctantly approved, more concerned with Emily's public behavior than the presence of a well-trained dog. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Linda Mitchell asked her daughter, straightening Emily's navy blazer. "You can still change your mind if you're feeling nervous." "I'm fine, Mom," Emily replied with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "It's just a short presentation about civic engagement, like Mrs. Reynolds suggested." Robert Mitchell squeezed her shoulder encouragingly. "We're proud of you for taking this step regardless of how it goes. Just remember to speak clearly and make eye contact." Emily nodded, clutching her folder of presentation materials while her free hand rested reassuringly on Max's head. Inside the folder, hidden behind her approved slides, were printouts of the most damning evidence from the Jenkins files. Documentation of falsified environmental reports, manipulated water quality tests, and financial transactions linking Mayor Thompson directly to Westfield's offshore accounts. As they made their way to their assigned seats in the front row, Emily felt the weight of multiple gazes following her. William Westfield's cold stare was expected, but she was surprised to notice several unfamiliar men positioned strategically around the room, their attention fixed on her with unsettling intensity. Security personnel, she realized, not regular town employees, but professionals brought in specifically for this event. Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order with practiced charm, welcoming the attendees and outlining the evening's agenda. Several routine matters were addressed first: budget approvals, infrastructure updates, and recognition of community achievements. Cameras from local news outlets recorded the proceedings exactly as Emily had hoped. "Before we continue with our main presentation on Project Oak Ridge Revival," Mayor Thompson announced, "we have a special segment featuring one of our bright young students. Emily Mitchell from Oak Ridge Middle School will share her perspective on youth civic engagement. Emily, please come to the podium." As Emily rose, she felt a slight resistance on Max's leash. The dog wasn't moving, his attention fixed on something near the back of the room. Following his gaze, Emily noticed Sarah Jenkins slipping quietly into a seat in the last row, her face partially obscured by a baseball cap. Their eyes met briefly before Sarah gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Drawing a deep breath, Emily approached the podium, Max padding faithfully beside her. She arranged her materials carefully, aware of Mayor Thompson hovering uncomfortably close, ostensibly to adjust the microphone, but clearly positioned to intervene if necessary. "Good evening," Emily began, her voice steadier than she expected. "My name is Emily Mitchell, and I'm here to talk about the importance of civic awareness and accountability in local governance." She launched into her prepared introduction, discussing the theoretical framework of transparent governance while clicking through her approved slides. From the corner of her eye, she could see Mayor Thompson gradually relaxing, clearly relieved that she appeared to be sticking to the script. "Civic engagement isn't just about voting or attending meetings," Emily continued, reaching the critical transition point in her presentation. "It's about active oversight of public projects and expenditures. For example, when examining the proposed budget for Project Oak Ridge Revival." Mayor Thompson stepped forward abruptly. "Thank you, Emily. I think we should move on to—" "I'm still within my allotted time, Mayor Thompson," Emily interrupted politely but firmly, gesturing to the timer visible on her laptop screen. Several audience members murmured in agreement, and the mayor reluctantly stepped back, though his expression had darkened considerably. Emily quickly clicked to her next slide, one that hadn't been included in the version approved by Principal Davis. It displayed a side-by-side comparison of the official environmental impact report for the industrial development and the original, unaltered laboratory results that Michael Jenkins had documented. As concerned citizens, we have a responsibility to question discrepancies in public information, Emily stated, her voice gaining strength as she pointed to the highlighted sections showing dangerously elevated levels of chemical contaminants. These are the actual test results from Anderson Environmental Labs conducted last April, compared with the modified version submitted to the town council. A murmur rippled through the audience as people leaned forward, straining to see the projected data. William Westfield had risen from his seat, his face flushed with anger as he signaled to someone at the back of the room. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Mayor Thompson interjected, moving toward the laptop. "This isn't the approved presentation. Actually, it's the presentation this town needs to see," Emily countered, quickly advancing to the next slide, a series of photographs showing improper waste disposal at the development site. These images document violations of state environmental protection laws that could potentially contaminate our groundwater. The murmuring in the room grew louder. A reporter from the Philadelphia Tribune stood up, camera in hand, capturing images of the projected evidence. "That's enough," Mayor Thompson snapped, reaching for Emily's laptop. "This is completely inappropriate." Suddenly, the lights in the community center went out, plunging the room into darkness except for the glow of Emily's presentation on the screen. A moment of confused silence was followed by startled exclamations and the sound of movement at the back of the room. Emily felt Max press against her legs, his body tense and alert. In the dim light from the emergency exit signs, she could see two of Westfield's security personnel moving purposefully toward the podium. This was it. They were shutting her down, just as she'd feared. What happened next occurred so quickly that later accounts from witnesses varied dramatically. Max, sensing the approaching threat, suddenly darted away from Emily's side, circling behind the podium with unprecedented speed and purpose. In the confusion, his leash wrapped around one security guard's legs, causing the man to stumble into his colleague. Both men lost their balance, crashing into the AV equipment table with a spectacular clatter. The disruption was amplified when Max, seemingly by accident, knocked over a pitcher of water that had been placed near the council members' table. The water cascaded directly onto a power strip, where several devices were plugged in, causing a brief electrical spark and triggering the building's safety system. Sprinklers activated in that section of the room, drenching Mayor Thompson, William Westfield, and several council members. In the ensuing chaos, no one noticed Emily calmly connecting her USB drive to the podium computer, which remained operational despite the partial power outage. As the emergency lights flickered on and confused attendees began moving toward the exits, the large screen behind Emily illuminated with a new image, the first page of a confidential memo from William Westfield to Mayor Thompson, detailing the containment strategy for potential whistleblowers and the financial incentives for cooperating officials. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emily's voice cut through the commotion, amplified by the still-functioning microphone. "Before you leave, you should know that Project Oak Ridge Revival isn't what you've been told. It's a deliberate attempt to develop contaminated land without improper remediation, putting our entire town at risk of groundwater pollution." The crowd, halfway to the exits, paused and turned back toward the compelling evidence displayed on the screen. Emily continued, her voice growing more confident with each word. "The documents you're seeing have been verified. They show that Mayor Thompson, William Westfield, and several council members have knowingly falsified environmental reports, bribed inspectors, and concealed the true condition of the development site. They planned to complete the project, collect their profits, and leave Oak Ridge before the contamination issues became evident. William Westfield lunged toward the podium, his face contorted with rage. "This is preposterous. She's a disturbed child who—" Max positioned himself between Westfield and Emily, his hackles raised and a low growl emanating from his throat. The businessman stopped short, startled by the dog's protective stance. In that critical moment, an unexpected voice rose from the crowd. "She's telling the truth." Sarah Jenkins had stepped forward, her husband Michael now beside her. "My husband was the security officer who recorded these meetings. We have the original files." Another voice joined in, a middle-aged woman Emily recognized as Dr. Helen Carter from the Community Health Center. "I've been tracking unusual respiratory complaints in residents near the development site for months. The symptoms align with exposure to the exact chemicals mentioned in those reports." More voices rose, more people stepping forward with corroborating concerns and observations that suddenly made sense in light of Emily's revelations. The narrative was shifting rapidly, the carefully constructed facade crumbling as years of suspicions and unexplained incidents fell into a coherent pattern. Mayor Thompson, soaking wet and ashen-faced, attempted to regain control. "This is a complete misrepresentation." "Is it?" The question came from Robert Mitchell, Emily's father, who had moved to stand beside his daughter. He held up his phone, displaying an email he had just received. "I just forwarded these documents to the State Environmental Protection Agency, the District Attorney's Office, and the FBI Field Office in Philadelphia. If this is a misrepresentation, I'm sure they'll determine that during their investigation." Emily looked up at her father in surprise. He placed his hand on her shoulder, his expression a mixture of apology and pride. "I should have listened to you sooner," he said quietly, "but I'm listening now." Linda Mitchell joined them, her eyes filled with tears as she embraced her daughter. "We both are." The community center had transformed from a routine town meeting into something unprecedented, a spontaneous public reckoning. Journalists were photographing the projected documents, residents were recording with their phones, and a stunned William Westfield was being confronted by angry business owners whose properties would be directly affected by the contamination. Council member Richardson, seizing an opportunity to distance himself from the scandal, stepped forward dramatically. "I want it on record that I was not privy to these falsified reports. I voted based on the information provided to me, which I now see was manipulated." "Oh, that's a lie," came Michael Jenkins' steady voice. "I have recordings of you specifically discussing how to conceal the environmental data." As accusations and denials flew across the room, Emily knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around the dog that had changed everything. "You planned that, didn't you?" she whispered against his fur. The dog licked her cheek, his intelligent eyes seeming to convey understanding beyond what should be possible for an animal. 2 uniformed police officers entered the community center, followed by a woman in a suit who introduced herself as Agent Lawson from the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division. "We received some very interesting files about an hour ago," she announced, surveying the chaotic scene with practiced calm. "I see we arrived just in time." Emily watched as Mayor Thompson, William Westfield, and several council members were separated for questioning. The mayor caught her eye briefly, his expression a combination of defeat and disbelief, unable to comprehend how his carefully constructed scheme had been dismantled by a 12-year-old girl and her dog. In the days that followed, Oak Ridge experienced a seismic shift in its power structure. Interim leadership was appointed as investigations expanded to include state and federal agencies. Environmental specialists descended on the development site, confirming Emily's warnings about potential groundwater contamination and immediately implementing containment measures that should have been in place from the beginning. The media coverage was extensive, with Emily and Max reluctantly becoming minor celebrities. She declined most interview requests, preferring to focus on ensuring that the necessary remediation work was properly conducted. The few statements, She did emphasize the importance of civic vigilance and the courage to question authority when something seems wrong. At Oakridge Middle School, the dynamic shifted dramatically. Principal Davis, who had close ties to Mayor Thompson, took an extended leave of absence pending investigation of his role in attempting to silence Emily. Jessica Turner and her friends, witnessing Emily's vindication, attempted to rewrite history by claiming they always knew something wasn't right about those people. Emily accepted their revisionist overtures with grace, but maintained her distance, finding more authentic connections with classmates who approached her with genuine respect rather than opportunistic friendship. To her surprise, she discovered that many of her peers had harbored their own doubts about the town leadership, but had lacked the courage or evidence to speak out. 1 month after the town hall revelation, the Mitchell family hosted a community gathering in their backyard, a celebration of truth and accountability rather than a victory party. Sarah and Michael Jenkins were there with their children, their financial future looking brighter after Michael was hired by the State Environmental Agency based on his whistleblower credentials. Dr. Carter from the health center discussed plans for long-term monitoring of residents who might have been exposed to contaminants. Even Mrs. Reynolds attended, offering a sincere apology for misjudging Emily's concerns. As twilight settled over the gathering, Robert Mitchell called for everyone's attention, raising his glass in a toast. "To my extraordinary daughter, who taught this town and her father the meaning of true civic courage." Applause rippled through the group, causing Emily to blush as she stood beside her parents, Max faithfully at her side. "Actually," Emily said when the applause quieted, "the real hero is Max." She knelt beside the dog, who seemed to beam with pride as approving murmurs and affectionate laughter spread through the crowd. He found the recorder that started everything. He led me to evidence I would never have discovered on my own. And at the town hall meeting, well, we all saw what he did. "Smart dog," Michael Jenkins commented, reaching down to scratch Max behind the ears, almost like he understood exactly what was happening. Emily exchanged a knowing glance. With Max, whose intelligent eyes held a depth that still amazed her, perhaps he did understand, in ways humans couldn't fully comprehend, or perhaps his actions had been guided by something simpler but no less powerful, unwavering loyalty to the one person who had always trusted him completely. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, Emily sat on the porch swing with Max beside her, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Her father joined them, settling on her other side. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I keep thinking about how close we came to disaster, not just the environmental crisis, but the way they nearly succeeded in silencing you. If Max hadn't found that recorder, or if he hadn't caused that perfect distraction at the town hall," Emily added, stroking the dog's soft fur. "It's like he knew exactly what to do, exactly when to do it." Robert Mitchell studied the dog with newfound respect. "Your mother always said there was something special about him, even when he was a scruffy rescue puppy. I thought she was just being sentimental, but now I wonder—" Max's ears perked up, as if he appreciated being the topic of conversation. Emily laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Whatever his secret is, I'm just glad he's ours." The new interim mayor, Eleanor Wells, had promised transparent governance and immediate action on environmental remediation. The state had committed resources to comprehensive water quality testing, and Westfield Enterprises' assets had been frozen pending the outcome of multiple investigations. The corruption that had threatened Oakridge had been exposed, and the slow process of rebuilding trust in local institutions had begun. Emily had already been invited to join a newly formed youth advisory council for the town, ensuring that younger voices would have official representation in community decisions. Her experience had transformed not just her own life, but the future of Oakridge itself. As she sat between her father and Max, enjoying the peaceful evening, Emily realized that the journey had changed her in ways she was still discovering. The girl who had once been isolated by her intelligence had found her voice and her purpose. The skepticism that had once alienated her had become her greatest strength, and the bond with the extraordinary dog beside her had proven more powerful than all the forces aligned against them. "You know what Mrs. Reynolds told me today," Emily said, breaking the comfortable silence. "She said sometimes the most important civic duty is simply paying attention to what others ignore, seeing patterns others miss." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "She's right. And that's always been your superpower, hasn't it? Seeing what others don't, or won't." Max shifted position, resting his head on Emily's lap as if adding his agreement to this assessment. She smiled, feeling a deep contentment settle over her. The road ahead would have challenges, testifying in upcoming trials, helping coordinate the environmental monitoring programs, navigating her new role as reluctant local hero. But those challenges no longer felt isolating or insurmountable. "I think," Emily said softly, watching the first fireflies of the season begin their luminous dance across the yard, "that's everyone's superpower, if they choose to use it." The future of Oakridge was unwritten, its path forward now visible but not yet traveled. There would be difficult revelations ahead, uncomfortable truths to confront, and hard work to repair the damage done by years of corruption. But tonight, in this moment of quiet triumph, Emily Mitchell and her remarkable dog had accomplished something profound. They had transformed a conspiracy of silence into a chorus of voices demanding truth. And in doing so, they had reminded an entire community that sometimes the most powerful defenders of justice are the ones most easily overlooked. A brilliant girl, once dismissed as peculiar, and a loyal dog with uncanny intuition, working together to change the world, one small town at a time. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily and Max's powerful journey of courage and perseverance has touched your hearts. Their story reminds us that even when powerful forces try to silence the truth, determination and loyalty can prevail against all odds. For more captivating tales that explore the complexities of justice, corruption, and unlikely heroes, we've prepared a special playlist you can find by clicking on the link to your left. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique narratives that delve into the depth of human experience and the extraordinary connections we form with our animal companions. Don't miss our upcoming content. We can't wait to see your thoughts in the comment section below.